Making molds with organics and then creating impressions into crystal clay using Pearl-X powder to create that interesting texture and design are a fun way to create interesting pendants. These two have a resin over the top of them, while this one is left with just the crystal clay and the Pearl-X powders. So let me walk you through the steps of how you can make a mold using organics. To make the mold, I'm using a silicone putty. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. Once you activate this clay, you have a very short period of time to work with it, and it allows you time to make an impression. Here's some examples of what the finished results will look like making molds using the organics and the silicone putty. You'll also want to think about what kind of organics that you would like to use to make your impression. I just went out into the garden and gathered a variety of different leaves from various plants. I like to look for leaves that have a lot of definition in them, because that shows up really nicely when you press that down into the mold. Here's an example of a leaf that doesn't have very much definition, so that won't show up as much in the mold. Here's some examples of other types of leaves that would have a better chance. It's starting to become fall here, so the leaf selection. Here's other examples of leaves that will make really nice impressions, because you can see how much definition there is on the back side of this leaf. Other things that you can use are grass. This is a little bit of from my anise plant. This makes a great mold, and it's in fact what was used to make something like this. So select your organics. I'm using mine when they're freshly picked and not dried, because it'll make it easier to embed into the silicone putty and press down. Other things that you can do is you could use found objects. This is a casting of a vintage button that I had, and that is what was used to make these pieces here. So you can use also vintage buttons or found objects. You don't have to necessarily just use organics. I like to lay down a little piece of plastic to make it easy for me to work with the silicone molding putty and not have it stick to my surface. You're going to want to pull out, open up and pull out a ball. It's up to you about what size you want to use, but I'm using bezels that are fairly small, so I'm not going to need a huge amount to make my mold. In fact, that might even be more than enough. So go ahead and open up the part A and part B of this silicone putty and pull out equal sized balls. Looks like I have more of the B. So I'm rolling these into somewhat round balls so that I can see how close I am in. This doesn't have to be really exact, but you want to try to make it as exact as possible. Alright, so now that we have the silicone balls, before we do anything, we're going to take a little bit of time and make sure that we have everything set up. We're going to want to make sure that we have a good idea of the organics that we want to try to make the mold of, or you could make one with a button or something else. So I'm going to focus on using this, so I have that ready to go. Other things that you're going to want to have ready is some wet wipes, because the silicone putty can get oily and on your fingers. You'll also want to have some sort of way in which you can press down onto the clay and make a flat disc. So you could either use the top part of your silicone to press down. I dug through the kitchen and found this bowl so I can press down. There's no logo or anything on the bottom. It's just a nice smooth bowl so that I could show you when I'm pressing that down. So find some sort of flat surface that you can use to make your press down your putty to make it a flat, nice disc. Now I'm ready to mix my silicone molding putty, and I have a very short window to work with this before it starts to harden and you can't make an impression on it. That's why I like to have everything ready. I have to tell you, I've had different people have different results, and I don't know if it's because they didn't have the right size balls. I don't know if it's a chemical thing that's happening between their hands and the putty. If maybe there's some sort of, if you're on medications, it might speed up the process. But just know that you need to work fast with this. So that's why it's important to have your whole entire station set up prior to mixing. So how I like to work with this is I'll start to knead these together with my fingertips, and you want to mix them together until they're no longer marbled. I have tried all kinds of different ways between, you know, folding it over on top of itself in the palms of my hands, and what I have found to be the best is by kneading it with my fingertips, because I have more control of making sure that it's fully blended. All right, you can see that I don't have any kind of marbling going on. So once I get to that point, I'm going to bring it to the palms of my hands. I'm going to roll it into a nice smooth ball. So there's a limited amount of creases in it. If you can't seem to get those creases out, just put the creases to the best of your ability downside. And then you're going to take, I have my bowl here, and now I'm going to press it into a nice flat patty. Now I'm not making it too incredibly flat. I still want it to be somewhat nice. So now I have a nice flat surface, and I'm ready to, I have a little piece right here that's kind of funky, so I'm thinking about where that's going to go as far as my design. I'm also thinking about, on this particular one, I'm going to be using it with a bail pendant, so that's why I put the leaf farther up on that design. Then I'm just slightly pressing it down. I don't know if you can see that there. Now you're just going to let your leaf stay inside of that putty until it is firm to the touch. So as you can see, these bezels that I'm working with, they have a bail, and so when I said I wanted to have my organic somewhat towards the top, it was taking into consideration that distance that I'd have here. So when I make that impression here, that I have enough of an area up here to make this visually interesting. So when I've made molds before, you know, like on this one, I had a lot of putty up here, so I needed to trim it, so I just used a pair of scissors to cut that straight edge so that I could make an impression with that, taking into consideration that bail. It didn't take much time at all. I would say even 10 minutes for this to be completely firm to the touch. So when that's ready, you can just bend back the side, and you can see that the organic will just peel right off, and now you have a nice impression that you can use for mixing your crystal clay and making an impression onto the clay.